Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and thank you for joining me. Tonight's stories are going to be darker than those you've come to enjoy from me, but I'm sure you'll agree after hearing them, they'll leave you feeling just as creeped out, if not worse. Let's have some fun as we journey into the unknown. Once, many years ago, there was a family that lived on the edge of town. They were a family that many town folks were wary of. They were a family that had consisted of the father, the mother, 3 boys and 2 girls. The family were not ordinary people, as the son was always seen on the edge of town, standing on the corner with a stick in his hand, waiting for someone or something alive to come by. One day, the family came to town to the town's only grocery store. Everyone was surprised by this, as the family grew their own food and raised their own meat. The mother was picking fruit and vegetables, while the children went to the toy aisle and the father went to the automotive department. They were in the checkout when a new girl in town was behind them in line. She didn't know the story of the family, so she was talking to the youngest girl. The cashier was shocked that the girl was talking to them. She stopped scanning the groceries and stared at the girl for a few minutes before she regained her composure and proceeded scanning. Later that day, the new girl was seen leaving the town in a car towards the family of the edge of town's house. A week went by, and the new girl's whereabouts was the talk of the town. Nobody knew where she was. They just assumed she left. A few weeks later, it was the town's foundation day, an outdoor cookout in the town square. Everyone in town was there, including the family from the edge of town. They brought some of their self-raised meat, and it was praised by everyone there that night. It was so delicious, in fact, that the townfolk demanded more. It became more and more pressing, almost like a drug addiction, making the family go from being outcasts to the center of attention. The meat was so high in demand that it was becoming scarce, and the townfolk were becoming more and more demanding. The family struggled to meet demand, and soon after, people started to become uncontrollable and needing their fix of that delicious meat. Eventually, the town became run down and abandoned until it was discovered by an out-of-town fisherman. The fisherman was going to the lake outside of town and was setting up camp when he saw something on the edge of the woods. He was 30 feet away from the fence that hid the house that belonged to the family. Something caught his attention through the fence though, so he climbed it, edging his way to whatever he saw. He stopped, and his blood ran cold in fear. It was the heads of more than 100 people. What he presumed were their skins were stretched out on wooden racks, and there were barrels of salt. The old fisherman ran back to his boat, but he reported it to the authorities, putting this town on the map. In this day and age, finding a decent guy at a bar, a club, or even through work has failed me. I'd given up on meeting guys the traditional way, so I opted for the 21st century way, online dating. More specifically, I would try out Tinder. Let me begin by saying that I have some expectations when it comes to whom I swipe left and right to. My expectations are somewhat simple. Don't be a catfish, hold a decent conversation, be nice, and being attractive oftentimes helps. After a couple of hours of swiping, I matched with a 22-year-old man named Stavo. This guy worked at his family's morgue. With that being said, he worked the graveyard shifts, and since I was an insomniac, it worked out great for the both of us. We would talk on the phone all night, bonding over Game of Thrones theories, fun facts, and lame dad jokes he'd often tell. On the rare occasion, if I were home alone, he'd tell me scary stories that would keep me up until the early hours of the morning. Eventually, text messages and phone calls led to meeting up in person at a coffee shop. The first date went well. He didn't try anything stupid. In fact, he was extremely respectful. A nice change for once. I had to agree on a second date. He said he would cook me dinner. I walked to his apartment. It was just like I imagined it. The walls were covered with books and records, and even mythological creature statues. Now, when a man offers to cook dinner, I don't have the highest expectations. I think of a pizza or store-bought spaghetti paired with a salad. With that being said, Stavo had outdone himself with the presentation of the food. The meat was covered in a seasoning that was both sweet and spicy at the same time. The vegetables had butter and sea salt melted on it. The potatoes were twice baked. My favourite. He cracked open a bottle of wine, and we said a toast. "To Tinder," he said, beaming. "To Tinder," I responded, equally happy. I took a bite of the meat and was a bit disappointed. It definitely looked better than it tasted. Luckily, when I mixed it in with the vegetables and potatoes, it was edible. I watched as Stavo poked around his meat, taking only one tiny bite. "Not hungry?" I asked, dabbing the corners of my mouth with a napkin. He shook his head and smiled. "I don't usually eat what I cooked. I feel like it isn't up to my expectations. Besides, I had a double cheeseburger about an hour ago. I couldn't help myself." He smiled sheepishly. "Well, this is fantastic. You've really outdone yourself," I said, knowing it was only half truthful. The end of the night came, and I was ready to go to bed. "Thanks for everything again. This was a great dinner." He gave me a quick kiss goodnight, and off I went back to my house. I was lying in bed tossing and turning. For some reason, my stomach was killing me, even after taking some quick relief medications for it. I walked to the washroom and spent the rest of the night gripping the toilet bowl. My parents had woken up from the amount of noise I was making and took me to the hospital where I got my stomach pumped. The doctors ran some tests to see what I ingested in the last 24 hours that made me so sick. They came back with the news that made me want to hell once more. I had ingested pieces of embalmed human remains. My stomach lurched. A friend of mine showed me how to use Google Maps. I'm sure you've seen it. It lets you see satellite images to look at locations all over the world. A few years ago, I was in a car accident. Since then, I don't really leave the house that often. It's difficult, and the idea of seeing a car drive by makes me feel lightheaded. I was fascinated by the fact that I could see all over the world, almost like being there. I could virtually walk down the streets, and it almost felt like I was really there. I became instantly hooked. It gave me a real eye on the world. I could go to almost any major city, and I did. I'd been to streets in China, Japan, Germany, England, so many places. I'd even gone to tourist attractions like the Great Barrier Reef and Dracula's Castle. My favourite was to go to random places in major cities and see how many people and animals I could find. The faces of the people were always blurred to protect their privacy, but it was still enjoyable to see them out there, enjoying their life, walking like it was no big deal. She must have good taste, I laughed. I zoomed in closer and noticed the grey bag she carried on a grey and purple shoulder strap. She was walking in a relaxed manner, one hand trailing the wall beside her. I bet if I could see in her face, I would see that she was smiling. I began to feel a little sad. I let my hands fall onto arms of my wheelchair and looked at her for a minute more. I wished that I could be there, walking so carefree with her. That wouldn't happen though, until I died. I was stuck in this chair. I sighed and zoomed out of Tokyo. Enough of this for tonight. I turned off the computer and went to bed. I got up early and decided to look around Paris. Paris was always fun. I liked the look of the city, with all the old beautiful buildings and so many people to watch. I randomly zoomed to an area and saw a street lined with old brick buildings, a few small shops, and an old tan brick church. Ahead was an intersection, and dozens of people walked by. A balding businessman quickly walked past, looking back at an old woman, hair covered with a scarf, carrying a large purse. A curvy woman in black pants that were too tight stared into a store window, and two women led a group of small children around the corner. I spun the view around a few more times, and then saw something peculiar. Sitting on the bench at the bus stop were two people. One of them was a young woman with her feet stuck in front of her in a relaxed manner. She was wearing a pair of red sneakers like my own. I startled for a moment as I noticed the black pants, white t-shirt, and black hooded jacket. Her dark brown hair was tied loosely behind her head. A grey bag sat on the bench beside her, and the shoulder strap hooked over the shoulder. This is crazy, I thought. It can't possibly be the same woman. This is a different country, different continent even. How could it be her? This was stupid. It wasn't as if these were live photographs. They were taken ahead of time and then stored. It's not like she was at two places at once. She could have just been a traveller. Besides, without seeing a face, it was impossible to tell it was the same person. Brown hair was probably the most common hair colour in the world. Those red sneakers were something I purchased online. I'm sure a million other people did too. I shook my head and went to fix some lunch. When I got back online, I decided to look at Berlin. I picked a random street as usual. Torstrasse in Mitte, northwest of Alexanderplatz. Now it looked pretty empty. There were brick buildings lining the street, looking more like factories than anything else. There were also empty lots, full of long grass and piled gravel. There wasn't much to see at all, really. There was a line of motorbikes and a car with 2 German flags sticking up from it. After more searching, I found one kid. He looked like he was dressed for school, a jacket thrown over his bag. He was intently looking at some kind of mobile device. I was disappointed. I started to leave, but then I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I turned the view, and there they were. Those damned red sneakers. She was standing on a street corner next to some kind of signpost. She had a hand on the post, looking down the street as if waiting to cross it. I stared in shock. How could she be there too? Even if she was travelling, there's no way I would find her every time. Even finding her in Paris would have been one heck of a coincidence. But this? This was crazy. Was this some kind of joke? Had Google decided to play a prank on its users that use their product so much? It would have been a great joke. I did a quick search, looking for a note about a woman that shows up like Waldo. There was nothing. I looked through articles and strange things you can see on Google Maps, but none of them mentioned the woman that travels the world with you. This was crazy. Had my self-imposed isolation driven me mad? Leaving the Berlin image on my screen, I sent a text message to a friend asking him to take a look at the locations. I asked him if he saw the same woman. Then I waited, hands sweating, heart thumping in my chest. I jumped when my phone beeped with a return message 10 minutes later. The text read, "I see the lady you're talking about in Berlin. I didn't see her in Paris or Tokyo. Is this some kind of game, or what? Are you okay?" I didn't respond, instead returning to the locations in Tokyo and Paris. There she was. She was there, but it was different. She no longer sat on the bus stop bench in Paris. She was standing in front of it, looking for something in a bag. In Tokyo, she was blocks away, squatting down to pet the calico cat. I shivered. I switched the map to Brussels. It was another city street. It was lined with old-looking buildings, with shops on the ground level and what I guessed was apartments above. I quickly scanned the streets. They were empty, other than a stocky woman in a bright blue sweater. I did a second sweep. She wasn't there. I sighed in relief. I couldn't believe I was getting so worked up about this. Now that I realized it was all in my head, I decided to explore the city a little bit more. I came across a white building with a black ironwork frame balcony jutting from the second floor. As I got closer and I looked up, there she was. Her head tilted in the direction of the camera, almost like she was coyly looking toward me. My breath caught in my throat. I switched to Sydney. She was leaning against the wall, inside the doorway of a bright blue Carrick's pharmacy building. London showed her getting ready to step onto a red double-decker bus, her head turned to look over her shoulder. She was everywhere I looked. She stood on a brick sidewalk on a bridge in Venice. She walked across a yellow barred crosswalk in Zurich and in Hong Kong. She stood between a Wing Lung bank and a McDonald's adjusting the strap on her bag. In each picture, she came closer and closer to looking directly at me with a blurred-out face. My heart felt like a terrified bird, slamming around inside my chest. I couldn't catch my breath. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't call the police. Should I send screenshots to Google? I clenched my fists tightly and closed my eyes. Who was she? Was she following me? Was I following her? I wish I could have seen the expression on her face, known what she saw when she looked back at me. I wanted to get out of my chair and run. Why is it that the only thing that made me feel free again was the thing that made me feel even more trapped? I had to know. I typed in the name of my town and zoomed into a random street. It was a couple of miles from my house. The gates to the city park were shown in the clarity of daylight, despite it being night there. There she was. She was only a few miles from my house, standing under the ironwork arch that stated the name of the park. She looked directly at the camera, directly at me. I felt like I might throw up. She was near me, and she was watching me. She was coming for me. What did she want? I typed the name of the apartment complex where I live. I could see the outside of the building. The parking lot was full of cars, and there were a few blurred out children on the playground. I searched everywhere for her. She wasn't in the parking lot or on the sidewalks, not hiding between the buildings or standing in the playground. I even scanned each of the cars, behind the bushes, and each of the blurred windows. She wasn't there. I curled tightly around myself and lay my head down on the desk. This place was safe. I didn't leave the apartment anyway. I would never use Google Maps again. I would never see her again. She could stay at that park for all I cared. I smiled to myself and was surprised to find a tear slipping down my face. I'm safe, I said to myself in a whisper. It felt good to hear it out loud. I'm safe. As I said it, there was a knock at the door. A chill ran down my spine. I had a camera hooked up to my computer that showed who was at the front door, which made it easier for me with my mobility issues. I slowly reached for the control to show myself who was outside, but my hand trembled furiously. As I touched the control, I realized my mistake. The last of Google's images that I'd seen had only shown outside of the building, just the outside. I looked at the screen and saw a woman in a white t-shirt, black pants, and a black hooded jacket carrying a grey bag with a purple and grey striped shoulder strap. Of course, there were those red sneakers as well. She looked directly at the camera, her face still a complete blur. That brings us to the end. I hope you liked the video. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and give it a like if you liked it. If you're new to the channel, why not hit subscribe and the notification bell so you get all the latest videos that I upload from now on. Now, if there's any type of theme or style or any type of story you'd like, you can let me know in the comments below, or you can hit me up on the social media links or on my Gmail address, which is thisismrreality@gmail.com. It's time to sign off, so I'll see you in the next one.